Hello and welcome. If you guys can hear me, would you let me know in the chat box? Okay, awesome. I'm going to... Thank you so much for coming today. I'm excited to have you all here. While we're waiting, we have about 4 minutes till it's go time. While we're waiting, I would love it if you'd share where you're from, what grade you teach, and then if it's your summer, if you're doing anything fun this summer, go ahead and type that into the chat box. Good morning, Anne. Welcome, Carrie in Iowa. Welcome, Melissa and Hallie, Darlene, Shayla, welcome. All right, so we've got Carrie here teaching first grade in Arizona. Oh, Megan, congratulations. She's planning her wedding. Kim teaching in California, welcome. Laura in Portage, Michigan, welcome. Courtney in Florida. Fatima from Algeria, welcome. Jessica from New Mexico, welcome. Linda, welcome. Ashley, first grade teacher, welcome. Ruth, a North Carolina first grade teacher, welcome. Jane in New Jersey, welcome. Amy from Missouri, welcome. Ellen, Panama City, Florida, welcome. Marjorie from Illinois, like me, welcome. Let's see. This is going fast. Melissa from Florida, welcome. Robin, another Illinois teacher in second grade, welcome. Rima is the IB PYP primary coordinator. I actually used to teach in a PYP program about 7 or 8 years ago, I guess. Diane, welcome. Beth, welcome. Michelle in South Carolina. Tamika, hopefully I'm saying your name right, in Pingree Grove, Illinois. Terry in Spring Hill, Tennessee, welcome. Angela in New Jersey, welcome. Catherine's from Santiago, Chile, welcome. Debbie is a kinder teacher in Atlanta, welcome. I used to teach in Atlanta, actually. Joelle teaches 1-2 Montessori in South Carolina, welcome. Puerto Rico, Carmen, welcome. Highland, Indiana, that's Amy, good morning. Oak Park, Annie, you are pretty close to me. Anna is a kindergarten teacher from Mexico, welcome. Christine, a reading specialist. So we've got about 2 more minutes. And if you're having any tech issues, I'm going to go ahead and put up the tech help box. That just has some tips, but basically shut down all your other programs, close out your other tabs, make sure this is the only thing you have open on your computer. Sometimes it can be easier to watch and listen in on a desktop computer or a laptop as opposed to a phone or tablet, but you can definitely still listen in on those devices for sure. And then they recommend the Google Chrome browser, but I've also seen other people say that Internet Explorer works well. So just try different things if you're having tech issues. There should be a reconnect button on your end in case something goes wrong. And then you can always rejoin via those, reminder emails. So do not fear if something happens. You can always get back on with us. All right, Jeanette teaches kindergarten in Elmhurst. Awesome, welcome. Amanda is in Nova Scotia, teaching first. Welcome. Justine, welcome from Texas. Renee, also from Texas. Hey, Samantha, she's a first grade teacher from Maryland. Marie's a literacy consultant. Christine is a kindergarten teacher from Illinois also. Awesome. Let's see. Bristol, Tennessee. Ashley, welcome. Ashley is in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome. Very cool. Lauren, hello from Ireland. Oh my gosh, we have so many people from all over the world. This is so exciting. Sally is in Fort Collins, Colorado. Mary is in Michigan. Welcome. Deb is in Nebraska. Welcome. Carol in New Jersey, teaching second. Welcome. Linda's an ESOL teacher in South Carolina. Welcome, Linda. Maria Jose is from Chile. Susan in Pennsylvania. Kelly in Texas. All right. Well, it is that time. So thank you again so much for being here. I am so excited to share with you today. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my slides. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to go, so typically my workshops are about an hour. This one's going to be a little bit more than an hour, not too much longer. But I just have a lot that I want to share with you, hopefully a lot of good stuff that will be helpful to you. A few housekeeping items before we begin. You should be able to see the first slide of my presentation. I said this before, but there is a reconnect button in case something goes wrong. You can also rejoin via those reminder emails. Make sure that you have all your other programs and tabs closed. That'll help you avoid any potential issues. And you can always try a different internet browser if the one that you're using doesn't work. I've heard from people that Internet Explorer works, but what they tell me is that Google Chrome is the best. So if something goes wrong, just try different things to get back on. There is a short delay. So what you're hearing me say now, I actually said like 30 seconds ago. So just something to keep in mind when we are chatting with the chat box. And speaking with the chat box, I do want to encourage you to comment, add on to what I'm saying, ask questions, answer each other's questions. The nice thing about being able to do these virtually is, as much as I would love to see you all in person, now we have people from all over the country and all over the world. So we can all benefit from each other's expertise. The comment box is really nice for that. I will miss comments and questions for sure because it scrolls very quickly, but I'll stop periodically and come back and try to pick up any questions that I've missed. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to tell you, okay, hey, this is in your freebie. You don't need to write this down. There are still going to be certain things that you might want to jot down, so I would grab paper and pencil just in case. And something that I say before I give any presentation, I'm sharing what I've learned as a literacy specialist. And before I was a literacy specialist, I was a classroom teacher. I started out teaching pre-K and taught kinder for several years, also first and second. I'm sharing what I've learned, but ultimately you have to do what's best for the kids in front of you. And I do understand that your school or district might have different mandates from what I am sharing here. It's nice to be with you too, Fatima. All right, so just a little bit about me if we're not acquainted yet. I am a primary grades literacy specialist. Right now, I live in the Chicago suburbs with my husband, Jonathan, and we have two little fur babies. This is Max, and this is Lindsay. I actually started my teaching career in Atlanta, teaching pre-K in the public schools, moved up here to the Chicago suburbs, which is actually kind of where I'm originally from. I've moved all over and taught kindergarten for several years here. Also taught first and second, and then several years ago became a literacy specialist. In my free time, as much as I love teaching, I also love to do non-teaching things. I love being outside, love traveling, love running, kayaking, basically all the good stuff that we can do here just in the summer. So now I want to talk a little bit about you. I have 4 statements here, and I'm going to read them off to you. And as I go, I'd like you to just kind of mentally count up how many of these you identify with, how many of these describe you. And then when I'm done reading all 4, go ahead and type the number in the chat box. So the first one says, many of my kids will write a sentence or two and tell me they are done. So I guess if, this is your summer, we're thinking back to last year, if you would identify with this. So many of my students need one-on-one attention, and there's only one of me. My students all have such different needs. I'm not sure how to differentiate to help them all. And I'm not really sure what I should be doing during writing conferences or small group instruction. So go ahead and let me know how many of these you would identify with or that you have identified with in the past. All right, so I'm seeing some 4s, some 3s, a lot of 4s. Okay, so I would love to be able to solve all of these problems completely for you. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but I do hope and I do think that by the end of this presentation and with the tools I'll be giving you in your freebie, you will have what you need to at least get started on solving many of these problems in your classroom that you're teaching in currently or that you will be teaching in the following school year or coming up school year. So here's what's on our agenda for today. I'm going to start by sharing briefly, how I teach writing in my classroom. I know that many of you have been on workshops with me before, but I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of like where I'm coming from when I'm explaining things. And then we're going to go over some tips for promoting independence. And when I was first creating this workshop last year, I was thinking about, obviously we want to focus on differentiation because that's the focus. But at the same time, if we don't have our kids writing independently so that they can work on their own, a lot of what we do with differentiation can't happen. So that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about getting our writers working independently during writing time. And then we're going to move into differentiation strategies. And 2 of those strategies are going to be individual writing conferences and small group writing instruction, among others. We're going to go more in depth on these 2. And then I'll share with you some of the writing resources that I use, and I'll kind of explain how I balance a workshop approach and prompt writing during the school year. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, after each section, I will try to pick up one question that I've missed. I know I'll miss more than that. At the end, that's when I'm going to stay and answer as many questions as I possibly can. If you've asked a question and like a lot of time has passed, feel free to type it again. It's not annoying at all. What happens is I can't scroll all the way down. The software stops letting me. So feel free to re-ask if I haven't gotten to your question like later on in the presentation. At the end here also, I'm going to be doing 2 things before I answer those questions. I'm going to be, 1, doing a giveaway. So make sure you stick around live for that so you can participate. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share the freebie. If you've been on a workshop with me before, you know that I share the freebie at the end, because if you are having other windows open, trying to download things, that can cause this that you're watching here to crash, and we don't want that. So at the very end, that's when I'll be sharing the freebie. Okay, so as I said, I want to share a little bit about how I teach writing, just a general overview quickly so that you kind of understand the perspective that I'm coming from. This is what my writing block looks like on a daily basis. We start out with a mini lesson that's about 10-ish minutes. Then the kids write, and it depends upon, the year and how long I have available for writing. I want to give them as much writing time as possible for practice. And that can be, 20 to 30 minutes less at the beginning of the year, especially with like kinder or first. And then we wrap up with the sharing time, which is just about 5 minutes. So that's kind of what our writing block looks like on a daily basis. And then in the past, on my blog, Learning at the Primary Pond, and in other workshops, I've talked a lot about writing workshop. And writing workshop is just an approach where, kids have a lot of choice. They choose their own topics. It's very student directed, very motivating too. And I think it's really powerful. But I also do prompt writing with my students. So that's where kids are responding to specific questions. It's a little bit less student directed. I think that both types of writing are important. As much as I love workshop, kids are also going to have to respond to questions and prompts in the future. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about what workshop is like in my classroom and what it's like when I have kids respond to prompts and how I balance these 2 different types of writing. So the majority of writing that we do follows the workshop approach. And for the workshop approach, I teach units in genres. So we might be having a unit on informational writing or a different unit on personal narratives. And within that unit, I'm teaching kids different skills that are specific to the genre. When they're, writing their own pieces, they're choosing individual topics within that genre. So if it's personal narratives, one child might be writing about a trip to the zoo and another is writing about when he broke his arm or whatever. So in the workshop model, during those mini lessons that I mentioned, I'm modeling the brainstorming and planning processes. I'm modeling, here's how we draft, revise, and edit. And I do lots of writing in front of the kids. That has been really helpful for them. They see what I'm writing, they hear what I'm thinking. And throughout a writing workshop unit, the kids are basically working at their own pace. At any given time, some students might be drafting, others are brainstorming, and then some other kids are editing. Kids write at different paces, so the workshop approach really, acknowledges that and allows kids to work at different paces. And so throughout one writing workshop unit, then, kids are writing multiple texts on different topics in that genre. But like I said, our daily writing time doesn't always follow that precise workshop approach. I do make time for kids to respond to specific prompts. So this is an example. This says, write about a time when you felt very happy. When we're doing this type of prompt writing, I will still have, I still follow this mini lesson and then independent writing time and then sharing time. And in the mini lesson, I am, modeling how I answer that prompt, or I'm teaching how to use transition words in their answers, or just something applicable to the prompt that we're working on. And speaking of modeling, when I am kind of like at the beginning of like a time frame of when we're working on prompts, which I'll talk a little bit more about that time frame later, I actually model responding to the same prompts that my kids are going to respond to. And when I first started teaching, I didn't do this a lot because I was worried, well, if I write my own answer and they see my whole answer, well, and they're just going to copy me, right? So that was my thinking. But what I eventually realized was that they are so much more successful if I do fully model the same prompt for them. And as a result, some of your kids, if you do this, they will write very similar responses to what you write. But over time, what you can do is, have a structure or a procedure that they know for responding to a prompt. So when after you've done modeling for multiple prompts, then you can kind of do less modeling, put more responsibility on them, and really encourage them to come up with their own ideas. So then, how do we fit in both types of writing? If you use my writing units, my writing workshop units, then you know that I structure these around genres. And so what I do with them is I'll do a writing unit in one genre, and then we'll do 1 or 2 weeks of prompt writing in that same genre. So for example, let's say that we just did a whole writing workshop unit on informational writing. Then I'll do like 2-ish weeks of prompt writing, again on informational writing. And I'm telling the kids, this is the same type of writing, it's just a different purpose. So I'm getting them to apply the workshop skills that they've learned to the prompt writing. So we've got that informational writing unit for workshop. Then we've got like 2-ish weeks of prompt writing for informational writing. And then maybe we move on to, narrative writing. And we'll do a unit on narrative writing in workshop. And then we'll do 2 weeks of prompt writing, also narrative writing. So we kind of go through the year that way. If you happen to use my 1st or 2nd grade writing workshop units, then you know that there's also a specific stopping point, at least one in each unit. And once in a while, I've also done a week of prompt writing there just because it's a natural stopping point. But basically, I want to make sure either we're finished with the workshop unit or we've reached a stopping point. We've done one writing project before I move on to prompts. All right, let's see if I can get a question. Okay, this is a good one. Cecilia asks, how long is a writing unit in a grade like 2nd grade? So some of my writing units, they can go on a while. They can be up to 8 weeks, I would say. Maybe not 8 weeks, maybe more like 6. So a writing unit might be six-ish weeks. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we only have one final product at the end. We might have 3 weeks of working on a certain type of project. This is how I like to structure my units in a grade like 2nd or 1st. We'll do 2 or 3 weeks on one type of writing within that genre, and then they'll have a mini, celebration or a way to share their writing so that they have an upcoming deadline to work toward that's not 6 weeks away, because that's a long time for a kid. So I'll break it up that way. We'll have one little project that lasts 2 or 3 weeks, and then we have another little project that lasts 3 or 4 weeks. And so the unit is typically broken up that way. In kindergarten, my units tend to be a bit shorter, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Again, if you feel like you need to break up your unit, you can always do what I do and have a stopping point midway and, have the kids share their project with the class or, with their parents, or have them celebrate and feel finished halfway through and then do it again at the end. I know I'm missing questions, but again, I promise I will come back to them at the end. So as I said, before we even begin to differentiate our writing instruction, we need to get certain things in place so that we can differentiate. In my opinion, independence is truly the foundation of everything, because if during writing time you're constantly running around and, putting out fires, so to speak, you're not going to have many opportunities to differentiate and meet students' needs. On the other hand, if your kids know how to get started, how to get their own supplies, how to spell words, what they should do if they finish one, assignment or project, then you're going to be able to do things like meet with kids individually and with small groups. So for that reason, over the next few slides, I'm going to share my top tips for getting kids to write more independently. In my opinion, having high expectations for independence at the beginning of the school year is crucial. At the same time, I don't think it's ever too late to start over. So, if you're teaching internationally or you're in the middle of your school year for whatever reason and you feel like your kids need to become more independent, I don't think it's too late. Whether you're starting at the beginning of the school year or creating a fresh start, you want your students to assume as much responsibility as possible. And one of the ways that I do this is by having my kids choose their topics independently. We definitely do prompt writing, as I mentioned, but I don't start out with that prompt writing at the beginning of the school year. I start out with that more like general student-directed workshop type of approach where the kids have to choose a topic. Maybe I give them like a broad genre or category, but they have to choose their own topics and write about them. What I found is that if I start off the year with prompts, they start getting used to that. And so then, when I ask them, okay, here's this general broad genre or topic, and you choose a subtopic to write about, they're not able to if I've only given them prompts up until then. So just to kind of restate that, I start out by having them choose their own topic so that they don't get dependent upon, having a prompt to write about. This is an example of another thing that I do not do at the beginning of the school year. So this photo is it just shows, I wrote this, I like to eat, and then the kids would have to fill in the last word. I like to eat pizza. This is called a sentence frame or a sentence starter, and I do use these for sure. I'll talk about those later on. But at the beginning of the year, I do not do this because I want to teach my students how to write sentences independently. Of course, if I'm in kindergarten or if I'm teaching kindergarten, we start with letters and words. We don't start with sentences. But at the beginning of the year, that's what we're working on, writing complete sentences. Again, what can happen is if I'm always providing these for them, they get hooked on that. And some kids, not all, but some kids won't be able to or won't think that they can write their own sentences if they get so used to this. An important part of encouraging independence from the start, I think, is to choose your words carefully. Whatever I say, I'm always trying to put the responsibility back on my students for figuring things out. In your freebie, there's this list that I made of suggested questions and responses to things that your kids might say during writing time. Some of the things that I say, and you'll see on the list, I say stuff like, how are you going to figure that out if they come to me with a problem? Or if they don't know how to spell a word, what strategy are you going to use to spell that? So just constantly, I'm reminding them, they are responsible for solving their own problems during writing time. And speaking of solving problems, we need to anticipate and observe what problems our students encounter during writing time, and then create mini lessons to teach our kids how to solve those problems on their own. So an example of a problem would be a student rips their paper. What are they supposed to do? We've got to teach them, here's the tape, this is what you do. It can take a while for a first grader to be able to use tape appropriately without pulling out the whole roll, I know. But at the same time, if we don't teach them how to do that, then every time a child rips their paper, we're going to have to stop our conference or stop our small group and get up and fix it for them. So ultimately, it will save us time if we just teach them how to use tape the right way. In your freebie, there's a list of many different potential problems that your kids might encounter, like the tape example, and you might have some of your own to add. But generally speaking, I will teach a mini lesson on how to solve each of those problems at the beginning of the school year, but then we may have to revisit them with mini lessons periodically as the year goes on. So, as I said on that lister, you're going to find a bunch of different problems. We don't have time to go in depth on all of them because our focus today is really differentiation. But I do want to go more in depth on two of those problems, two big ones. The first one we're going to talk about is what students should do when they don't know what to write about. And the second one is what students should do when they don't know how to spell a word. So allowing kids to self-select their writing topics can be super motivating. But at the same time, then sometimes we have to deal with the issue of our kids don't know what to write about. In your mini lesson, not your mini lesson, in your freebie, I've put a photo of this anchor chart. But because this, issue of not knowing what to write about is just such a common problem, at least in my experience, I do think it's helpful to Hey, can you guys hear me? Yay! Okay. Oh my gosh. So my internet just went out. I have no idea why, and I'm using the hotspot on my phone. So hopefully we will be able to stay connected. Sorry about that. Thank you for sticking around. All right. So back to what I was saying. I was saying that this is an anchor chart from a mini lesson I teach on when kids don't know what to write about. But the advantage of putting this up in your classroom is that if a child comes up to you and says, I don't know what to write about, like sometimes our first instinct is to say something like, well, write about your weekend or write about, our field trip. But the problem is when we suggest something specific like this, then you're still teaching the child to rely upon you, right? But if you have this chart up in the classroom, what you're doing is, and you're saying, the child says, I don't know what to write about. And you say, okay, well, where in the room could you look? They're relying upon themselves and they're not relying upon you for an idea, which again saves you time and allows you to differentiate your writing instruction more because you're not running around solving little problems like these the whole time. Okay, so if you're having audio issues, just try reconnecting. I would also, if it's echoing or something weird, just rejoin. Go back to that email and rejoin. It's possible that when my internet went down, it just messed things up on your end. So terribly sorry about that, but we're going to go ahead and keep rolling. So another strategy I use to help keep kids from running out of topics is a beginning of the unit brainstorming sheet. And at the beginning of many, if not all, of my writing units, what I like to do is have the kids brainstorm different topics within that genre. So like this says nonfiction brainstorming. I believe it's from my second grade unit. And so at the beginning of the unit, they brainstorm topics that they know a lot about. Like, do they know nature topics, plants, animals, weather? They can list different things here. People, athletes, famous people, community helpers. They can list topics here, places, activities, other. So it's giving them some guidance, but it's still having them come up with their own topics. And then if you put this on like thicker paper or colored paper and have them keep it in their writing folders, then during workshop time, they're writing and they're finishing pieces at their own pace. When they need to start a new one, they just come back to the sheet and pick a topic right away. And that kind of, prevents the issue that you might have with kids just sitting there thinking about what they're going to write about for 30 minutes or, just not starting a new piece at all because they don't know what to write about. They can always come back to this sheet to get ideas. Another strategy, I think I read this in a book, or I got this from a book, was if you have a basket or a bin of mentor texts in the genre that you're writing on, then you can teach the kids how to go to that bin, look through the books, and not copy them, of course, but kind of use them as like seed ideas for getting other ideas for topics that they could write about to spark ideas. You just keep that in your classroom. The kids know they can go over there and look at the books for ideas if they don't have an idea for what they want to write about. So the second common problem we're going to talk about today is the spelling issue. So to recap, we talked about, there are many different problems that kids need to learn how to solve. Before I got disconnected, we started talking about what to do if kids don't know what to write about. And the second issue I wanted to talk about is what to do, what they should do if they don't know how to spell a word. We don't want our kids to be restricted to spelling only words that they know, because if that's the case, they're not going to be able to get hardly any of their ideas on paper. Most of us here are working with the little ones. They only know how to spell a handful of words, especially like in first grade, kindergarten. So we want them to be able to write more than just the words they know how to spell. At the same time, many kids are scared of taking risks with invented spelling. Just like with selecting topics, I think the beginning of the school year is crucial. I will teach multiple mini lessons on different spelling strategies, and I really, really emphasize risk taking. You can even use that term with them, risk taking, over correctness. So when I'm teaching kinder or first grade, I do not discuss correct spelling during writing time at all for weeks and weeks. And at the beginning of the school year, I don't spell words for kids at any time of the day, not for the first month or more. And then once I see that they're able to use strategies and spell words independently, that's when we begin talking a little bit more about, polishing up our spelling. And speaking of spelling strategies, in your freebie, you're going to find a list of different strategies that you might teach your kids. Not all of these are going to be appropriate for the kids at your grade level. There's kind of a range here, but it's just stuff like, write the sounds you hear, listen for a word family, and then as you go on up, write one syllable at a time. Again, these are in your freebie. And in addition to those explicit mini lessons at the beginning of the year, and you follow up throughout the year, I also think that it's important to model these repeatedly during your mini lessons. Even if your mini lesson is on something like, writing a strong introduction, you can still model, for example, how to use an alphabet chart. Just very quickly, as you're modeling the writing, you have a sample alphabet chart there, and as you're spelling a word, you're just quickly thinking aloud about how you use the alphabet chart. Some kids just need exposure and more exposure to those strategies. They need to see them modeled repeatedly before they use them. So, we can't just restrict these too many lessons at the beginning of the year. These are things that we have to model over and over and over again. Teaching spelling or word study at a different time of the day can help kids become better spellers and more comfortable spelling words during writing time. But the problem that I've had in the past is that many of my kids will seem like they know a word pattern because they use it during spelling or word study activities, and they can, do it fine then. But then they're not applying that to their own writing. So they haven't fully absorbed it. They haven't fully learned a word pattern if they can't apply it in their own writing. So what I like to do is just here or there throughout the school year, I'll plan a lesson to help my kids connect what we're working on in word study or what they're working on, because it's differentiated the way I do it, to what they're writing. So during those lessons, you can just do something really simple, like have them, take a list of words or a spelling pattern and then look through their writing folders looking for examples of words that they've written with those patterns, maybe fixing them if they need to. Maybe they could write them on sticky notes, make a little list. Just something simple like that to get them thinking, hey, I'm learning this in word study, but I also need to be applying it in writing. It's also just something I talk about repeatedly throughout the school year. Oh, hey, we were talking about the pattern IGH. I'm writing this word and it has IGH in it. Just constantly trying to get them to make that connection. Although I want my kids to become risk takers with their spelling, we do eventually start talking more about correct spelling and the importance of spelling the best that we can in order to help our readers read our writing. And then when I start talking about this, some kids, they become hesitant to take spelling risks again, to do that, invented spelling. So when I notice that a number of students are having this issue, I will teach a mini lesson about what happens when writers don't take spelling risks. And in my mini lesson, I show kids these two pieces of writing, and these are in your freebie, by the way. So I'll explain, I'll just say, if writers only use words or write words that they know how to spell, then our ideas can get trapped in our heads and they can't come out. So I'll put one of these up at a time, and this page just says, I have a cat, and it's all spelled correctly. And then this page is also about the cat, it's my cat, and there's tons of detail, but a lot of the words are spelled incorrectly. And so, we talk about which piece is more interesting to read, why is it more interesting? And then at the end of the lesson, I tell them, when you're writing, use your very best spelling. Don't get stuck writing only the words that you know how to spell, because they've seen now that even though some words are spelled incorrectly, the writing is a lot more interesting when they take risks. So again, in your freebie, I have these two sheets so you can try that out. And there's also a lesson plan, a complete lesson plan to go with it. Using visual supports is also super important in developing student independence, whether it's spelling or coming up with ideas or something else. And so we all know that wall space is precious, right? We've got only so much room for anchor charts. Anchor charts are great, but we run out of room. So I also like to do kind of like mini anchor charts or writing folder tools. You might have this freebie already, but if you don't, it's a separate freebie that's linked to in your freebie that you're getting today. But basically, I will buy my kids sturdy writing folders that have the 3 little prongs in the middle so that they can put papers in there. Before I put something in there, I always model how to use it repeatedly, and then I put it in there. I don't just stick everything in there at once. But these are things like an alphabet chart for spelling, blends and digraphs chart, an editing checklist. So visuals are helpful. We don't have to limit ourselves to the anchor charts that we have space for on the walls. We can also give our students little tools that they have right in front of them when they're writing on their tabletop or their desktop. Another tool that I use to develop independence is a revising and editing table, and I've used this with first grade and up. Kids will go to this table, as they're writing when they're ready to revise and edit a piece. And when they go to that table, they work with a partner. They take turns reading their work aloud to each other and talk about how to make it better. They might use a rubric, and then they go back to their seats and they make the changes that they discussed. So this has worked so well for my kids after like multiple years, many years of me feeling frustrated, like they're not really making changes to their work. For whatever reason, getting to get up out of their seats and, work with a friend to make their writing better has been super motivating, super effective. And it's just something that I love doing with them. And they really enjoy doing it too, because they like working together. They're not telling you, I'm done. They know what to do. And I'm going to talk more about this, not today because we don't really have time. I believe in October, I'm going to do a complete workshop on teaching editing. And during that workshop, we will go more in depth on using the revising and editing table. Okay, so one last tip for promoting independence is to get your kids really invested in their writing by having frequent writing celebrations. So I found that when my kids are motivated to write and they're looking forward to these celebrations, they're looking forward to sharing with an audience, they tend to work more independently. And I can also sort of play off that and say things like, well, you better get to work, next week is our big celebration, and they'll, stop whatever they were doing, getting off task, and they'll get back to work. So to create this sort of, motivating environment, before I teach any unit, I decide what our writing celebrations are going to be. Like I said before, I might have a mid-unit and then like an end of the unit celebration. I decide how the kids are going to publish their writing and who their audience is going to be. Even if it's just a small group of kids in the class, there's going to be some real audience that they share with. So then throughout that unit, I'm always talking about the celebration. And as I mentioned before, my kids write a bunch of different pieces in that genre. So obviously they're not publishing and sharing every single piece of writing that they write. So the way I kind of explain this to them is, you're writing lots of pieces and then you're going to get to share your best or your very favorite piece during this celebration. So they're trying to create lots of good options to choose from when we do publish. In your freebie, you're going to find a list of ideas for writing celebrations, things that I've done, and a list of possible audiences. I know there's lots of additional ways to help keep our kids writing or get them to write independently. I know I've missed some for sure. We got to move on to differentiation, but whatever strategies you use to get your kids writing independently, just stay consistent. So if you expect your kids to, start a new story on their own after they finish one, and then a child comes up to you and says she's done, don't tell her what to do. Ask her what she should do and how she can figure it out if she doesn't know. And it definitely takes time, especially with our little guys, but the more consistent we stay with our expectations, the more independent they become. Okay. Peggy says, how often do you publish with kinders? With kinders, I would say about between every 4 and 6 weeks, depending how long the unit is. You can always do like a mid-unit publishing party or whatever as well if you feel like that's too long for your kids to wait. And one last question, I want to address this with Patricia. Patricia, you actually don't control students going to the revising and editing table. You just teach them that when they're finished with the piece, they go over there, they partner up, and then they work. All right, so this is our main event, main course for today. Once your students have become more independent with their writing, then you're going to have more time for differentiation. So now I want to go over the 5 main strategies that I use to differentiate my writing instruction. So my first strategy is that I conduct individual conferences with students during independent writing time. And in the next section, I'm going to go much more in depth on this. The second thing I do is I teach small group writing conferences, again, going more in depth with this in a minute. The third strategy I use is differentiated writing paper. It is such a simple thing, but the way the paper is structured, like the number of lines, how big is the space for drawing, that can, make a student feel overwhelmed, or it can provide support that they need. It can stretch them to write more. There's a ton of possibilities. When I'm working with students in K2, I almost always use writing paper instead of journals or notebooks. Especially in K1, I really want them to understand that connection between, we're reading books and we're making books. And when young kids write in notebooks, what I found is that they can get confused about where their story or their piece of writing starts and ends because there's no clear first or last page in a journal. There's a ton of pages. And then their stories can just end up taking pages and pages, and you're not sure if it's a new story or it ended. And this kind of thing can happen, when kids write on paper too. But when you provide a structured booklet for them, you give them 3 pages that are stapled together, that's less likely to happen. Having them write on individual pieces of paper or paper stapled together also gives you more options for differentiation. So these pieces of paper all have a different number of lines, as you can see. Some kids may need just a few lines, and if you give them more, they're going to feel overwhelmed. Some kids, if you give them more lines, they will write more and they'll include more details. So the number of lines, you might want to give some kids paper that looks like this and other kids paper that looks like this. That's a way to differentiate. Pre-stapled booklets, writing booklets, can be a great support too. So if you, for example, you're teaching a personal narrative unit, if you want your kids to be writing a beginning, middle, and end, then give them these little booklets with 3 pages of these line pages stapled together. Page 1 is for the beginning, page 2 is for the middle, and then page 3 is for the end. That helps them structure their writing. Or let's say you're writing an opinion piece and you want kids to include an introduction, 2 reasons, and a conclusion, then give them a 4-page booklet so that they, are more likely to structure their work that way. You can offer these booklets to some students or all of your kids. You can provide loose sheets in case they want to write more. You can staple them on. But this is a pretty simple way to differentiate. You may want to, let your kids choose what type of paper or booklets they use, or if a child really needs some help with that choice, then you might want to strongly suggest that they use a certain type of paper. And speaking of, differentiating paper, you can also offer different templates for different types of pages. So let's say you're doing an informational writing unit. We all have a couple of kids who, they've seen a table of contents in a book and they could make their own from scratch, but other kids are going to need more support. So if you at least offer this, then that helps them structure their table of contents as opposed to just giving them a blank sheet of paper. So word banks are another way to differentiate. I have one here at the bottom of the sheet of paper, and then I enlarged it so you could hopefully see it a little better. These are especially great for English language learners or kids with limited vocabularies. You can write a word bank on the board. You guys are all writing about a certain topic. What kind of words are we going to use in your writing? So then before they go off to write, kids throw out words, you put them on the board, and they can use them to help. It can also be really helpful if they're, right on the paper where kids can see them. So this prompt says, write about an animal that lives in the ocean. And then I put the words swim, underwater, sand, school, fin, flipper. These are all words that they can use in their writing, and that will help my kids expand the level of vocabulary they include in their writing, and it helps them feel like they get help with spelling, with at least some of the words. Again, this is something you can put on the board before kids go write. In your freebie, there's also this editable template I give you that is like a separate half sheet that you would give the kids. In that particular thing in the freebie, it's not right on the page, but you can still type in words, print it out, and they have that half sheet next to them while they're writing. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't begin the year with those sentence starters or sentence frames because I want my kids to get in the habit of attempting to write complete sentences on their own. But as the year goes on, I do incorporate sentence starters. Again, these can be super helpful for English language learners. They can also help kids just structure their piece of writing as a whole, though. So this particular prompt again says, write about an animal that lives in the ocean. And the first sentence starter says, one ocean animal is blank. One fact about this animal is blank. Another fact about this animal is blank. This animal is blank. So even if your kids can write full sentences, it helps them, get this introduction. They're introducing their topic, 2 facts, and then a conclusion. So it can help them with structuring their writing as well. Self-assessment checklists are another tool that you can use to differentiate. Some of our students, you can give them a checklist that's in their writing folder and they can refer to that. But others of our students need a little more help. And so if it's right there on the page, they finish their writing, they look down, it's a little bit more evident that they have to use it. And I've found that these self-assessment checklists are really helpful for kids who tend to ignore conventions, punctuation, capitalization tends to be missing. Or they can be great for those kids who finish super quickly. They want to be done with their writing. This slows them down, gets them thinking about their conventions, also the content of their writing. It encourages them to go back and spend a little bit more time with their writing before rushing off to the next thing. So when we use tools with our students like word banks or sentence starters or anything else, we also have to remember to eventually remove them or use the tools, the supports less often. Of course, we always have students who need extra supports, that's built into their IEP or they just need them. So I'm not talking about those kids, but generally speaking, we need to remove the scaffolds that we provide to our students over time because we're doing a disservice to them. If they no longer need those supports, then, we don't need to keep providing them. All right, so a fourth strategy that I use to differentiate is leveled checklists or rubrics. If you use my kinder first or second grade writing units, you know that there's typically like one main rubric for each unit. And that's what we all use at the end. That's what I refer to with the whole group. But throughout the unit, while the kids are working, I also incorporate other rubrics or checklists to help the kids decide, am I done with this piece? How can I make it better? And so those during unit rubrics are typically the ones that I differentiate because, certain rubrics or checklists, they can limit a student. It doesn't get them to stretch and become even better. On the other hand, for some of our lower kids, if you give them a checklist that's appropriate for an average student, that might seem super overwhelming. So for that reason, I use a leveled checklist or leveled rubrics with them during the unit. And these are from my revising and editing toolkit. In the freebie, I linked to where you can get that. But basically, this is an example of the informational writing checklist. And level A has things like, my writing clearly tells about one topic. I put spaces between my words. Level B includes things like I told true facts about the topic. I use ending punctuation and commas correctly. It gets more challenging as you go from level A to C. And so when I'm using differentiated rubrics or checklists, in the whole group, I will just mention and explain, okay, you're going to be using this to make your writing even better, to make sure you're really finished with the piece. but then I don't show them how to use the checklist because I'm giving different checklists to different groups of students. I will model how to use it in a small group setting. So if half my class is getting level C, the rest of the class will work independently, and I model how to use this checklist for them. And then we switch, and I show the other kids how to use level B or whatever they're using, so that they learn exactly the checklist that I'm asking them to use. Oops, sorry, hit my glass. Okay, so my fifth and final strategy for differentiation is to incorporate individual goal setting into writing time. There are so many different ways that you can do this. You can do this during individual conferences, which we'll talk more about in a minute. You can teach some whole class mini lessons on it, and then all of your kids on Mondays, they choose a writing goal for the week to work on. But however you do it, when you help your kids choose good goals, you're helping different kids focus on different things during writing time, and that is a form of differentiation. This is a free tool that's included in your freebie. There's actually a bunch of these for different genres and different levels. This is a stand-up goal card. I bought these little mini clothespins on Amazon just because I thought they were cute, but you can use, you can have the kids like draw a dot on it or use a paper clip or something like that. I print them on cardstock. They stand right up on the kids' table, so it's like right in front of their face, which I love. And it just gives them a visual reminder of what they're supposed to be focusing on, what they need to work on in their writing. You'll see in the freebie, like one side will have simpler goals, and then the other side will have more complex goals for the genre, so you can kind of guide your kids, in which side they should be choosing from. And then in the freebie, there's also an editable template in case you want to make your own little stand-up goal cards too. All right, let me see if I can pick up one question. Okay, so yeah, some people are asking about the resources. So this one is free. That's in your freebie. These are in my revising and editing toolkit. I will at the end, I don't want, to click and open another link right now, but at the end, I'm going to share where you can get these. These are in my TPT store, and so are the writing units that I was mentioning. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in my opinion, one of the best ways to differentiate writing instruction is by meeting with students individually. So once our kids, can write independently more or less most of the time, that's when we can begin to dedicate time to conducting one-on-one writing conferences while the rest of our kids are writing independently. For me, a typical conference is about 4 to 5 minutes. I am guilty of making them too long, or at least I did when I first started doing them. So using a timer has really helped me. If let's say your independent writing time is like 25 minutes long, then maybe you're going to get through 4 or 5 students each day. But I wouldn't hold hard and fast to that rule if I were you, because the number of conferences that you teach in a day or in a week can depend on a lot of things. So first of all, there's a consideration of small groups. You might not be doing just independent conferences during writing time. Then you have to think about, where are you in your school year? At the beginning of the school year, I don't do writing conferences. I'm teaching them how to, learn the procedures and routines of writing workshops. So I don't have time to spend 4 or 5 minutes with a single kid. I'm trying to help everyone. And then, after a long holiday break, I scale back on conferences and I'm working on reteaching them the routines. And then last, the number of conferences that you conduct is also probably going to depend upon where you are in a particular unit. If you use those writing workshop units I've been talking about, you know that I like to give kids more guidance in getting started at the beginning of the unit. So for that first piece in the genre, as they're learning how to do that genre, how to write in that genre, the whole class is brainstorming together. The whole class is drafting together. We're all more in sync at the very beginning of the unit because they're just learning. So during that first part, I'm doing briefer check-in conferences just to make sure that everyone is getting it. When we're first learning something, it's not a good use of my time if I'm spending a ton of time with 4 or 5 kids and then, 20 more, like totally off track. So just to restate, for the first couple of days that we're working in a new unit or a new genre, I typically don't do my regular writing conferences because I want to check in with more kids. I want to make sure they're on the right track. Then as they get the hang of things and, they're all working on different pieces, they're at different places in the writing process, that's when I go back to my usual number of conferences and small groups. But when we're ready to wrap up a unit, the balance kind of shifts again. Kids might need help getting their writing polished up for publication, so maybe I'm doing more check-ins, or maybe I'm doing fewer check-ins to spend more time helping them edit. So all of that is to say that I no longer say to myself, I have to get this number of writing conferences done in a week because it depends on A, the number of small groups I'm doing. I can still see kids that way. B, where we are in the school year, and C, where we are in a particular genre or unit of study. So even though I don't, set that certain number of conferences for myself, the one thing I always try to do is confer with all of my writers, either individually or in a small group at some point throughout the week. So, if I meet with a child in a small group setting one week, that's great. Then next week, I'll try to do an individual conference. In your not your writing folder, in your freebie, you're going to find, this is like the top of a sheet that's in there. And it's something that I now use to help myself balance small group instruction and individual conferences. And I use this sheet over a period of like multiple weeks. So instead of worrying like, oh, I didn't get, to this child for a conference this week, then I see, okay, well, maybe I didn't get to them for an individual conference this week, but I did a small group. And so then I can kind of track over time, am I missing anything? Do I need to add more small groups, more individual conferences? I can see over time how I'm reaching all of my students and if there are any gaps. When I'm conferring, I like to use a conferring bag. I am organized, but I'm also really scatterbrained, so I will lose stuff around the room. And frankly, I don't have time to, run around and get everything I need. When it's time for conferences, those are so quick. The time goes by so fast, especially if, you're teaching kindergarten and your kids don't write for a long time. That time just goes fast. So what I do is I keep the stuff that I need in a bag. It's just my writing conferring bag. And in that bag, I usually have sticky notes because I don't like to write directly on kids' writing. I want them to take ownership. So if I want to write something for them, I'll put it on a sticky note and stick it on their table or on their writing utensil. It's nice if you have a mentor text, preferably one that you've read aloud to the kids already and talked about, in your bag that you can reference if you want to teach a kid something. You might have also mentor text that you create, samples, or samples that kids have done in previous years. And having this in your bag all together is just really helpful in getting those conferences going quickly. So during the actual conference, I often follow an observe, complement, teach structure. And this is not something that I made up. This is something that I learned. Not all of my conferences follow this, but when I do, I start out with the observation. And in that part, I see what the child's working on, what strategies is she using or not using. And I might have the child read aloud some of her writing to me, which is especially important if you're teaching kids who do not spell traditionally yet, meaning their writing looks like gibberish to you, so you can't read it on your own time. But I also might just quickly skim the piece of writing silently. If I can read the spelling, I might just ask her. I might not read the writing and say, are you doing this in your writing, or how's this going? Just talking to them about their writing. All of that can be observation. So I'm also, during this portion, I'm trying to gather information. I want to figure out, what am I going to compliment this child on? What am I going to teach this child during the rest of the conference? And during this time, I try to keep like a class checklist with me. So I might jot something down, jot a note about how the child's doing. Sometimes this observation component does happen before I actually sit down with the child for the conference. I might have picked up the kids' writing folder the previous night and read through it. So I sit down and I already know that they need to work on writing strong introductions. choosing the focus of your conference beforehand can save time, because then this portion really doesn't have to happen. So, I would say 50% of the time I have a plan and 50% of the time I don't have a plan, and I just want to see, what they're doing and what I notice in that moment. That balance shifts for kinder when they're not spelling traditionally yet. I once in a while will take their writing folders and plan out what I want to do during the conference, but because I typically can't read their writing, at least at the beginning of the year, I usually rely on this observation component to figure out what they're trying to say. So next, we move into the compliment portion of the conference. And I like to think of this part as me just saying, keep doing this, whatever they're doing, instead of just an opportunity to say, a simple good job. I want to provide positive feedback. I want to build that relationship with the child, but I also want to kind of teach them through the compliment. I want them to continue doing whatever they're doing that they're doing great on. So an example of this, let's say that a student is doing a really nice job with transition words. So I might say, wow, you are really using our transition words anchor chart. I see that you included first, next, and also in your piece. This helps me as the reader understand that you have 3 different ideas to share. Keep doing this in the other pieces that you write. So I know that's wordy, but I could have just said, good job using transition words. Instead, I chose to reinforce the student's use of that anchor chart. I explained why it was important to use transition words, and I encouraged her to keep doing it, all in just this little compliment part. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, sometimes it can be hard to come up with a compliment for a student. One of them has just been goofing off the whole time. They hardly have anything written down on the page, or, it's totally incorrect what they've written. But in order to give a compliment and provide students with that affirmation that so many of them desperately need, we have to train ourselves to momentarily look past all those mistakes and really see whatever good that we can. So last, I choose a strategy to teach the student that's within reach, so to speak. So I can encourage the student to, try out a new strategy that she's not using yet. I can encourage the student to focus on using a strategy more consistently, or I can, revisit what we talked about in a previous conference. If I need to reteach or, teach it in a different way, then I'll do that, the strategy. So when I'm doing this teaching portion, it's hard to keep it quick for sure, but I usually start by stating what I want them to try. I'll give an example. And as I showed you in that photo of my conferring bag, the example can come from a sample that I created. It can come from a mentor text. I can write something right then and there if it's something I can do quickly, just to give them an example. And then I want the child to try out the teaching point, whatever I'm teaching them, one way or another. So it could be that they're doing that directly in the piece of writing they're working on. I could also give them a sticky note and they try it out. They write a sentence or whatever, and they put it on their piece of writing, and they can decide if they want it in their writing. But again, I don't write directly on the child's piece of writing at this point or any time during the conference. And then I wrap things up. I encourage them to keep doing it. I thank them for showing me what they're working on, and then I move on. So in my opinion, one of the most challenging parts of conferring is figuring out what to teach in, that moment. So one of the hard parts is that we have to learn to choose a single focus, just one thing, and we have to choose it fast because writing conferences are, they're quick. Sometimes we're going to want to reinforce or reteach what was taught in the mini lesson. And this makes a lot of sense because we want to teach them whatever our focus is, and then we want to reinforce it, help them apply it individually. However, the skill that we're teaching in the whole group lesson is not always a good fit for all students. You can also, if it's not a good fit for that student, you can look at your unit goals. In my writing workshop units, you get like a class checklist or a class little rubric that you can use, and it has the unit goals on top. If you just keep that in your writing bag or whatever, you pull that out, see, okay, well, maybe the topic of today's mini lesson isn't what I want to teach in this conference, but I can work on another goal in this unit. So you have that right there with you. That can help you quickly figure out a teaching point. Also, keep in mind that you can teach a strategy more than one time. Sometimes I feel like I always have to have a new topic for, the next conference. But if a child needs more work on, I don't know, using a spelling strategy, you might have multiple writing conferences over a period of weeks where you're focusing on that same strategy. And then, like I said, you might sometimes have a plan before you have that conference about what you're going to teach. And, to make that plan, you would just take the student's writing folder, review what they've been doing, or look at your anecdotal notes from previous conferences. And then when I'm conferring with a student, though, and I need to choose a teaching point in the moment when I haven't had something planned, sometimes I'm just tempted to focus on writing conventions. I see there's a missing period, there's a misspelled word, incorrect capitalization that just sort of jumps off the page at me. However, as important as correct conventions are, many of our writing conferences should focus on content. So we have to be able to sometimes intentionally ignore, the misused question mark. And we want to think about the strength of the introduction, the absence of a conclusion, transition words, details, all that good stuff. Because conventions are important, but really content-focused lessons or content-focused conferences are what can really move our students forward in their writing. I mentioned using unit goals as a starting point for what to teach in your conferences, and those can be super helpful. We all know, though, that sometimes we have students who struggle with those unit goals, or the unit goals are too easy for them. So in these cases, I often have to go up or down like a metaphorical ladder of related skills in order to find a within reach skill for a particular student or a group of students. So in your freebie, you're going to find this writing continuum, writing skills continuum. And this example has the skill of adding details for informational text. Let's say that you're teaching a whole class lesson on adding details by using adjectives. That's what your goal is, right? So for some students, when you confer with them, you don't want to focus on that goal because that's way too hard. So instead, you might teach them how to, add details to their drawings of the background, right? That's still adding details, still being descriptive, but it's not as hard as using adjectives to provide details, right? So you might do that in a small group or an individual conference. Or let's say that, you've taught that adjective skill in the whole group, but some of your kids already know how to use adjectives and they use them really well. That's easy. So maybe in small group, you teach them how to use adverbs. So in either of those examples, whether the kids are low or high, you're still focusing on this main goal of adding details, right? But for your lower kids, you're working on getting them to add details in their pictures because that's just where they're at right now, and that will eventually translate into their writing. For your really high kids, you're teaching them how to use adverbs instead of adjectives because that's where they're at right now. All the while, you're still maintaining this continuity of we're all more or less focusing on learning how to add details to our informational writing. Okay. I think actually I'm going to save the questions for the end because I know we're over time. The internet problem didn't help things, so I'm going to keep on rolling. We're getting close to the end though, so thanks for hanging with me. Make sure you stick around for the giveaway and freebie. Those are coming up soon. Before we get to that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about small group writing instruction. That's another great way to differentiate your instruction, and it can be a little bit more efficient than individual conferences because you can reach more than one student at a time. A small group writing conference involves you and 2 to 5 students. In my opinion, the sweet spot is around 3 or 4 kids. For kinder or first grade, I do like to stick to 3 kids at a time just because I feel like that's all I can handle. First grade later on in the year, I might get up to 4 kids, maybe 5 kids. But you still want to be able to provide relatively individualized instruction. When you pull a group of kids together, they don't necessarily need to have the same overall skill level as writers, but what they need to have is a similar area of need or a similar area where they would all benefit from, being challenged. So maybe the whole group needs to use the word wall more consistently, or maybe they would benefit from learning to write more interesting introductions. At the beginning of writing time, you can make your small groups if you do some drive-by observations. You see which kids are maybe getting it or not getting it and pull them together. You can do that informally that way. I also like to use those whole class checklists I've been talking about with the unit goals at the top, because what you can do there is as you're going through a unit, you're making notes about the kids and you have it all on one sheet or two sheets. And so then when it's time to pull a small group, you just see, these kids need to work on this goal. I see this on my sheet. You pull them together. And then that's a really easy way to figure out, which kids need to be together and what they need to work on when you're thinking about the unit goals. When I teach a small group, the structure of it is pretty similar in structure to a whole group mini lesson, but I would say that it involves less modeling and explicit teaching. Because I have the kids right in front of me, I can support a fewer number of students more closely, so we do more interactive and more guided practice. When my kids come to the table, their writing folder is either closed or their writing is face down on the table. I typically don't have them bring their pencils because that can just, this is not my pencil, I ate my eraser, all sorts of issues. So because the time is so short, I'll just have a cup of pencils they can use. And then I begin our little group by telling them what we're going to focus on, and I'll kind of connect it to what we're doing in whole group or, that unit that we're working on. So then next we'll do some sort of guided practice activity. And there's a ton of different things you can do for this. I've included a list of them in your freebie, but you could do something like, you reread or you read a new mentor text with the kids or just part of a text. That could be something that you write to that you're sharing with them. You could do shared writing with the kids where you're composing part of a piece together, or do interactive writing where the kids are actually sharing the pen with you and you're composing a sentence together. And whatever we're working on, I do get my students to try that out individually also because I'm right there to support them. And when they try it out individually, it might be that they're working directly on that piece of writing that they've been working on. Or it might be that they start a new piece of writing, that they're going to finish later on. Or it might be that they're just writing a page that they could use in a future booklet. Or they're just writing something on a sticky note. So it doesn't always necessarily have to be that they're working, in the piece of writing that they've been working on, but sometimes it can be. Sometimes our little small group ends really neatly where I do a wrap up and then they all go back to their seats. But often, because they're practicing something independently, I just have them go back to their seats once I see that they're getting it or once they've finished what I've asked them to do, because they're all finishing at different paces. All right. Heidi, good question. How does the time for a small group conference compare to individual conferences? This is a great question. Individual conferences, in my experience, tend to be shorter because, if you're just thinking about efficiency, right? You want to get, you want quality for sure, but you want to get to more of your kids, as many of your kids as possible, to give them, to provide as much differentiation as you can. So when you're working with just one child, I tend to take less time. When I'm working with a small group, I tend to take a little bit more time. I would say for small group, 10-ish minutes. And then I had mentioned 4 or 5 minutes for a conference, quicker if it's just a check-in. Okay, so I know some people have been asking about the different writing resources that I mentioned. I want to share a little bit of information with you about the writing workshop units that I have that I've been talking about. And then I also have these differentiated prompts that I created at the end of last year, or I guess put them together because I've been using them, but I put them on TPT last year. And so these are more of a workshop style, and then these are that prompt writing approach that I was talking about. So first I want to talk just a little bit about the writing units. Those will save you planning time. They'll engage your kids and get them writing more quantity. They'll be motivated to write because, like I've been talking about, you use writing celebrations and sharing with an audience to get them excited. So if you're using these units, something I want to mention is You don't have to use the units in the exact order. There's narrative, informational, and opinion writing units. You want to teach the unit that comes first in the sequence in that genre. So here's an example. If you're using the second grade units and you need to teach narrative writing, you don't have to teach Unit 2, the personal narratives unit, second, in the school year. But you want to teach Unit 2 before you teach Unit 5. Unit 5 is when you revisit narratives, but the skills are more challenging. So you don't have to use them in order, but just make sure that you use the unit that comes first in the genre before you use the second unit in the genre. If you use these, you already know they have complete lesson plans. Everything's written out for you. They do guide you through using things like mentor texts, and I will typically suggest at least one mentor text per unit. You can switch those out if you have different ones that you like to use, and not all of the lesson plans use mentor texts. The nice thing about these plans, I learned the hard way that it's a good idea to have your plans ready to hand to a sub in case you have an emergency. These are exactly that. You can basically just hand them to a sub, a maternity sub, emergency sub, and they can teach them. The units do address concepts like grammar and conventions. Those are integrated into the lesson plans. In addition, the first and second grade units come with these little exercises to reinforce what you've been teaching in the workshop units. Those can be used for morning work or something like that. They're totally optional. They're just kind of to reinforce what you're teaching in the plans. And then these units also have graphic organizers, printable posters, student writing paper, rubrics for you and the kids. The idea is that you're not searching for tons of materials, that pretty much everything you should need is right there included. All right, giveaway is coming soon, but I do want to talk a little bit about the prompts first and explain how those are different than the workshop units. These will also save you prep time, and they were designed to help you meet your kids' needs just by printing off different sheets of paper, and I'll show you how you can do that in a second. These also provide a really consistent structure for students. So when you do modeling, like at the beginning, because they're all structured a certain way, the kids will eventually need less modeling, and they learn how to use these very independently. Each of the prompts is going to have the prompt written here at the top and then a picture for our little friends who forget what the prompt was. The grade level bundles each have 60 different unique prompts. There's 20 narrative, 20 informational, and 20 for opinion writing. And then for every single prompt, you get at least one or two graphic organizer options. You get different types of drafting paper for the kids to write on. And then if you want them to publish their work, there's also like a little bit fancier paper that you can use. And this is for every single prompt. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with differentiation. For every single prompt in these bundles, you get lots of different paper options. So some of the paper will have sentence starters. Some of it has, some of them will have word banks, self-assessment checklists. All you need to do is print off the kind of paper that you want for different groups of kids, and you're ready to go. And then last but not least, you also have an opportunity when you get these to make your own, because I know that it's helpful for kids to use that consistent structure. So if you have your own prompts, there's a PowerPoint file where you can put your own in, create your own checklist. You can continue this structure, even if you have your own prompts that you need to use. Now I want to do a giveaway. So I'm going to pull people's names from the list of registrants. And if I call your name, what I would like you to do is just let me know that you're here in the comments, and then just send me an email and say, hey, I was one of the winners, and then I'll send you whatever you would like. So if you are a winner, you can choose from one of these bundles, or you can choose from one of these bundles. I have them each for K1 and 2. So let me start pulling names. All right, today is Thursday. Okay, first winner, if you are here, Danielle, it's Danielle NORVELLE at hotmail.com. Danielle, if you're here, let me know in the chat. Second winner is Kim. It's kim.weber at k12.sd.us. Kim, if you're here, let me know. Next one is Monique. Her email is butterflybasics@gmail.com. Monique, if you're here, let me know. I'm going to pull a few more. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, and I'm sorry, but it looks like Kerbrina, and the email is GOOSBY girl writing 1989 at gmail.com. Let me know if you're here. Ines, Soaring Bird 9 2004 at, it says Tahu.com, but I think it's supposed to be Yahoo. Crystal, CRYSFIK at gmail.com. Oh, yay. Okay, so we got a winner. One winner. See if I can get one more. Oh, Yocasta, did I call you too? You're here. Yay. Okay, awesome. All right, so it looks like we got our two winners. Let me know what you would like in an email. And if you didn't win, I'm still putting everything, or it is on sale already. It's all set up for you. All of those things that I talked about, the writing workshop units, the writing prompts. I also mentioned a revising and editing toolkit, which is also in my TPT store. All of that stuff is on sale for you. It's all set up. You don't need a code. That's in my TPT store, and the sale is going to last just through tomorrow, and it automatically turns off at, it's like TPT's time is Eastern US time, so it's automatically going to turn off at midnight Eastern time. If that link does not work for you for some reason, not to worry, I will send that out via email. Oh, Yocasta, you fooled me. All right, let me see if I can get one more winner. I thought I called your name. All right, Tracy.meyer at usd253.net, or Jody, you are who you are, I like that email address, at yahoo.com. Or Kathy, KKTS4 at hotmail.com. All right, so now I'm going to put up the freebie. I know we've gone a bit over an hour, so thank you so much for hanging with me. If you do have to run, I totally understand. Thanks again. I hope you got some good stuff out of this. If you can stay, I want to stick around and answer questions because I know I missed a bunch. Please feel free to retype your question, and I will try to get to as many of them as I can. Catherine, I'm glad this was helpful. Amy, yes, tomorrow I'll be sending out the replay. In about half an hour, I will send out all the links, and the recording will come out tomorrow. Oh, Jennifer, for the units, I actually do have a list. Email me, and I'll send it to you. Michelle, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Carol, yes, you will get, for attending live, you'll get a PD certificate emailed to you. Caitlin says, are readers' response considered prompt writing? I didn't include any reading response in this particular prompt bundle just because I know some teachers do that separately, but I do consider it in my mind to be a kind of prompt writing. I'm going to be doing a bunch of, I'm actually working on it now. I'm going to be doing a bunch of workshops on literacy centers in September, and also sharing some resources for reading response. And that will also be available and on sale in September. So keep an eye out for that. Joelle, so Lucy Calkins uses a workshop model, and my units also use a workshop model. Let me go back. Yeah, so these use a workshop model. I have not read her most recent units, so they're not, it's not designed to go hand in hand with them. That said, I know that a lot of teachers do use them. These are, I would say, from what they tell me, a bit more concise because they're just a page. And again, they use the workshop model and probably many of the same genres because it's the narrative, opinion, and informational writing. So if you're looking for something that's a perfect 100% match, I would say they're not right for you. But if you're looking for supplementary, something more concise, then they may work for you, yeah. So I did put up the freebie already. If you can't download it for whatever reason, you will get the link in about half an hour, so not to worry. Kathy, just email me about your question about grade levels. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Fatima. Oh, Jennifer, I'm sorry. So Jennifer was asking about a list of mentor texts for the units. I do have that I can send you for each of these bundles. So let me know if you need that. I guess she was scrolling through every page. I'm so sorry. I think there is in each unit, there is like one page that says all of the text for one unit. So there is that. But what I was saying is I have it combined for the whole bundle. Okay, so Katie's asking for professional books for learning more about best practices in writing instruction and writer's workshop. I do have some great books that I recommend in the freebie, Katie. I believe it's on the last page. If that isn't quite what you're looking for, feel free to email me. Thank you, Janice. Thanks for coming. Lisa, no, the freebie is different from last week's webinar. Last week was all about launching Writing Workshop at the beginning of the year. And so this particular freebie has more with differentiating. There may be like a little bit of overlap for the stuff that has to do with developing independence, but Lisa, make sure you download this because this is different. This has those goal cards. Kelly's asking about the revising and editing table. I will be doing a lot more on that in October. I have a revising and editing workshop plan that I want to do. So look for that in October. I do email out, and I'll just let you know when those are coming up. But I want to also put this link in the chat where you can look and just see what workshops are coming up because I'm pretty good about keeping this updated. Kelsey is asking for Kinder, do you draw a picture first or write first? Yeah, absolutely draw the picture first. That gets them going. I shared this in last week's workshop, but I like to have them talk about what they're going to write or draw, and then I have them draw it, and then I have them write. That really is helpful. Monica, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming. Shayla is asking about workshops for students with dyslexia or dysgraphia. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that. I don't have special education certification. That's something I have experience with, but I haven't planned any yet, but it's something I could think about. Oh, Emma, thank you for staying up. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so Marjorie was asking a little bit ago about what do I mean by publishing, and I mean that the kids are fixing up a piece of writing. They're making it the best that they can be. They are sharing it with the world by, they're putting it in the classroom library, or they're reading it to a small group of friends in the class, or they're reading it to a kindergarten buddy, or they're, sharing it with their families. They're sharing it with someone else. They're sharing it in a more polished form than they are with just all those drafts they're creating normally. Okay, so if you want me to email you the mentor text list, please email me directly. Just respond to one of those reminder emails, and then I will email over whatever you need. Janet, yes, I have a link to last week's session. You can email me and I'll send it over. Nicole, how do you deal with the students that want you to read every sentence they write? So that's sort of like a delicate balance because you want to show them that you're excited about what they're writing, but you obviously don't have time for that. So if that's something that you're experiencing, even with one student, what I would do is just kind of mention it in the whole group. Like, I am so proud of you. You guys have been doing a great job. When I come to you for your writing conference, that's a special time. And that's when you're going to be sharing your writing with me. Sometimes I might also take your folder out and take a peek, but you don't need to come up to me and share your writing because when I sit down with you, that's when our special time is together. So I just kind of, deflect that way, make our little individual conferences our special time for them to share with me. Cecilia says, how often and how you work with prompts after, before, between workshops. Cecilia, I think hopefully I understand what you're saying, but I will do a writing workshop unit or half of the unit, and then we'll do a little bit of prompt writing, and then I'll go back to workshop. So most of the year is workshop, but there's a natural pause, then I'll, work in some of the prompt writing. Let's see. Yes, Betty, since you attended this one, I will let you know about future webinars for sure. I also put that little link up there that you can look at. I have a bunch more planned for this summer, so make sure that I think I'll send out an email at the beginning of July, but I have a bunch more for this summer that you can sign up for now. I'm glad this was helpful, Stephanie. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so glad. Okay, so Mary says, what do you do when kids spend so much time drawing and don't attempt to write? I'm referring to kinder students mid-year. Yeah, so this is definitely something I've dealt with too. And I do a couple of things. So in the whole group, I will teach them, this is what a sketch is, like a quick pencil drawing. I want you to sketch, and then I want you to write. You should be spending more time on your writing now that you're, becoming big boys and girls, big writers or whatever. I want you to spend more time on your words and do a quick sketch. So you model that a couple times so they understand what you mean. And then another really easy thing you can do is just when kids are, they're having independent writing time, for the first 5-ish minutes or however long you want to give them to draw, they'll all start drawing probably. And then after those minutes, you just gently say, okay, now I want you to start working on your words. Just that little reminder can help. Okay, I'm going to try to answer one more question, and then I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to have to go. So Nicole says, I went to a Lisa Cleveland seminar. Not familiar with her. And she said that line paper and graphic organizers hinder writing. I think it just depends. I think it depends on your kids. Some kids really need graphic organizers to help plan things out. Some kids don't need them and it might hinder them. Some kids really need to feel like they have lines to write on, and some kids don't. I honestly feel like it's a kid-to-kid basis. For graphic organizers, I will say that at the beginning of the year, I don't start out using them because I've found that sometimes kids get confused if we do a graphic organizer and then I will follow that up with they're putting it in a booklet, then sometimes they get confused. They don't understand that they're writing the same thing that they just put in the graphic organizer into the story. So for that reason, I show them the end product first, what the story should look like. And then we back it up. And after they've done a couple of stories, then I'll say, okay, this graphic organizer can be used to plan your story. And then I'll introduce it. All right, well, I have to run, so thank you all so much for being here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and feel free to email me if you have any other questions that I missed.